I'm Tom Baker, this is Chasing Cars, and this is the Jeep Cherokee Trailhawk. Now, you might have seen one or two of these around, but the Cherokee Trailhawk is a rare and rather unusual car competing in the medium SUV class here in Australia. On paper, it goes up against the likes of the Mazda CX-5 and the Volkswagen Tiguan, but the Cherokee Trailhawk is actually a bona fide four-wheel drive, not just a pumped up hatchback with some cladding on it. Instead, the Cherokee has 221 mils of ground clearance, a weighting capacity of 480 mils, and these red recovery hooks as well, just to let you know that it's meant to go off-road and apparently that you're meant to get towed out as well. Now, underneath this rather shark-like snout, there's also another unusual element because this is a 3.2 litre naturally aspirated petrol V6 vehicle, so it's really powerful for the class, although not so torquey as we'll find out shortly. Now, this look is kind of new. There was a major facelift for the Cherokee last year, and you know, I actually think it looks kind of cool in this all blacked out specification. And the black continues inside the Cherokee as well. Now, the cabin didn't really receive any major changes in the facelift, but that's okay because you may not realize, but Jeep are actually building some really nice interiors at the moment, and that trend really started with this Cherokee when this generation was released quite a few years ago. Now, the materials are all nice, the layout is logical, the technology is easy to use, and it's comfortable. So, I mean, what's more to love? So we'll start with the tech. We have this big square format 8-inch screen, which is also quite unusual and quite rare to see. It's really crisp, the resolution's good, and Jeep have basically modeled it on a smartphone or a tablet interface, so it's really easy to use. You've got big tiles for stuff like the navigation, the media, the digital radio, and that's also connected to a stock stereo that sounds really good. In front of you, you've got a partially digital instrument cluster with a big speedo trip computer info, but it is a bit slow and lethargic to get through the various pages, but it's easy enough. And then between you and that, you have this absolute dinner plate sized steering wheel that is just massive, too big for the car. This is actually quite a small vehicle, so it doesn't need a huge tiller like this, but you do have nice metal paddle shifters, which is a cool touch. Now, the other thing is that the materials used on the dash and the door tops are actually quite plush, so it feels reasonably premium, even though this vehicle is only priced like a top spec Tiguan or a top spec CX-5, no more expensive than that. The nice materials continue to the black leather seats as well, which have red stitching on the Trailhawk and Trailhawk branding, so you know you bought the cool one. Now, they're comfy in kind of an American car way, so they're plush and soft, but over a long drive, they're not as supportive as one of those hard German seats that doesn't initially feel comfortable. In terms of practicality, it's decent. So we have a two-layer box here between the seats with a nice sort of felt line drop with lots of space, powered USB port, one in there, one here, reasonable door bins, but certainly not the biggest that I've seen, and big cup holders between the seats. So up front, there's a lot to like about the Cherokee. What about in the second row? Let's check it out. Well, the first thing is that the doors open really wide. So that's nice and easy for fitting a child seat. Once you're back here though, as an adult, the space is good. So as a 6-footer, my headroom's nothing to complain about. This vehicle doesn't have a sunroof. Legroom's fine, tow room is basically unlimited, so there's a good amount of room. A fifth person can fit because the hump in the floor is low, but as you can see, the seats are kind of sculpted to really be two outboard seats here, so this is a perch in the middle. But there are some tricks up the Cherokee's sleeve. The first is that the seats slide fore and aft, so you can increase your boot space if you want to. We have a flip down armrest with two cup holders, which is nice for a long drive. We have air vents and two more powered USB ports, so this thing is actually not a bad little family off-road road trip machine. And the soft materials continue in the back, which is exceedingly rare for this class and really good to see, so that when you've got kids leaning up against it or whatever, it's not just bare plastic. That's kind of why we like to see softer materials. So, you know, as a cabin, it's functional and it's comfortable, and I like that. Let's check out the boot. Coming around the back, the Cherokee was given a couple of updates in its recent facelift, so you'll notice the different taillight graphics and a few other amendments here and there. And you of course have this red recovery point, given that this is the Trailhawk, grade, so that's all very serious. And then underneath here, it has an electric tailgate. I keep pressing the wrong button, but eventually it comes up. And although the sort of load height is pretty high because this vehicle does sit higher than most of its rivals, the boot is definitely acceptable. There's a nice flat floor here, so you just slide bags straight in and out. There's no need to lift them up and over a big lip. And as you can see, if you put those back seats forward, you do get some extra space here in the cargo area. Plus there's two little bins, one off to either side. There's plenty of hooks, retractable cover. So it's actually a reasonably practical boot, almost European in style, but you'll notice after you press the lower boot button, it hangs around for a few seconds so nobody gets injured and you can't sue them. So when it comes to driving the Jeep Cherokee Trailhawk, we're going to start on road first because let's face it, that's where 95% of these cars are going to be spending the vast majority of their time. And then we're going to talk about how it performs off-road, especially given the Trailhawk model, despite being a transverse engine, does have full drive and low range and a locking rear differential. So it should be capable of, handling decent trails off-road, but we'll get to that. First of all, what's it like on the blacktop? Well, the answer is decent, though there are a few improvements that I think could be made to make the Cherokee a lot better to drive on the road. So we'll start with maybe not a negative, but an unusual point, and that's the engine. So we've got a 3.2 litre naturally aspirated petrol V6, the Pentastar engine for any FCA fans out there, and it produces 200 kilowatts of power and 315 Newton meters of torque. So it's powerful. 200 kilowatts is way more than you get in a top spec Tiguan or CX-5, and that's good, but it only makes that power really high up in the rev range, so you do have to go chasing it if you want it. And that brings me onto the 315 Newton meters of torque, which is a pretty low figure. So a turbocharged 4-cylinder usually produces about 350 Newton meters of torque. So despite being a much larger engine, bigger capacity, 2 extra cylinders, it feels a bit torqueless. So if you put your foot down, it makes a lot of noise, but fairly slow progress. Speaking of the noise, that is one of the upsides of having a petrol V6 engine. It certainly sounds more engaging than a diesel or a 4-cylinder. It's, kind of inviting noise for the ears to hear. However, it does like a drink. So over our time with the car, mostly in the suburbs, but also a bit on the open road, we've used about 13 litres per 100 kilometres, and it's a lot higher than that in town. It's like 16 in town, and for a mid-size SUV, that's just out of control. A normal car with a petrol engine in this category will use about 10 litres per 100 Ks in the burbs, whereas a diesel will use about 7.5. So it's a big trade-off to go for this petrol V6. So you have to figure out what it is you actually want to be doing with it. Thankfully, the rest of the Cherokee's dynamics on road are, acceptable to good. So the steering, I don't love it, but it's at least predictable and tracks a decent line through the corner, even though it's delivered through this really large steering wheel. The tyres are a weak spot for on-road driving because they're Yokohama Geolanders, but they're road-focused Geolanders. But there's just not a very high limit of grip on the road, so you do have to, take your time a little bit and not just barrel down a country road at full speed. But the ride quality is good. We have 65 series tyres, so a really chunky sidewall. You'd expect it to absorb bumps well, and it does, especially on only 17-inch wheels, so a really sensible sized wheel. And it's also pretty quiet in here and pretty refined. So it's a decent car to drive at distances where the economy will be at its best at a higher speed and where you can just enjoy the sort of long, loping ride quality. Plus the seats are decently comfortable. They're actually quite a bit more comfortable than the seats in the Jeep Grand Cherokee because they have a fair bit longer squab, so your legs aren't dangling around not knowing what to do. Plus there's an okay amount of safety stuff, so we have adaptive cruise control, but it's interesting because you can actually choose whether to have the adaptive function on or off. It can just be old school cruise control if you like, which I think is great, although I don't think that would comply with what the Euro NCAP crash test wants now. We have lane keep assist that works decently well, blind spot monitoring, rear cross traffic alert, a big reversing camera, but we don't have a terrain camera, and as we're about to find out, that can be a bit of a problem. The Trailhawk is the grade of Cherokee you'd buy if you were interested in some level of serious off-roading capability. Like other Trailhawks in the range, this car wears Jeep's Trail Rated badge, meaning it's been up and down the Rubicon and Moab, but given even the Compass is available in a Trailhawk grade, this doesn't mean quite as much as it once did. What means quite a lot though is this Cherokee's numbers. The ground clearance of 221mm is quite decent, while the Trailhawk's cutaway design offers an approach angle of 29.9 degrees, a breakover angle of 22.9 degrees, and a departure angle of 32.2 degrees, while the fording capacity is up to 508mm, plus there are underbody skid plates. The Trailhawk is also equipped with a transfer case, which is rare on a transverse engine vehicle, while it's also fitted with Jeep's active drive lock 4-wheel drive system, which enables 4x4 mode automatically. You can dial up what terrain you're seeing inside the car for dedicated throttle and shift response, while there's a locking rear differential on top. So those are our detailed impressions of the 2020 Jeep Cherokee Trailhawk. I reckon this is the right mid-size SUV for the right kind of person. If you're looking for a vehicle in that Mazda CX-5 sort of class, but with bona fide off-roading ability and really distinctive looks as well, I think you'll really like this car. It's certainly not sporty, but that's not what it's trying to do. It's entirely focused at getting you off the beaten track. Now, let me know below the video all of your thoughts about the Cherokee Trailhawk, whether or not you'd take a punt on a Jeep at this point in time, any feedback or suggestions, and as always, thanks for watching Chasing Cars.